The council chamber stretched far beyond what human eyes could easily see. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the massive space, forms ranging from the familiar to the utterly alien. Some breathed oxygen like humans did. Others existed as clouds of gas or crystalline formations that hummed with inner light. All of them had gathered for this single moment. Ambassador Deho stood in the center of it all, a small figure in a simple black suit. He had asked for this meeting 6 months ago. The council had made him wait, as they always did with humans. Behind him stood 20 other human representatives, each one silent and still. They had learned long ago. Patience was necessary when dealing with the older species. 300 years had passed. Since humanity first made contact with the Galactic Council, 300 years of service. 300 years of proving themselves over and over again. And today, humanity had come to ask for something simple: equality. The Supreme Chancellor finally spoke. His voice booming through translation devices that every species wore. He was a Volgrim, a species that had ruled the Council for over 2,000 years. His forearms gestured dramatically as he addressed the chamber. "We have reviewed humanity's petition for full Council membership," he announced. "We have considered their request for voting rights at the High Table. We have debated this matter thoroughly." Deho remained perfectly still. He had prepared for this moment his entire adult life. His father had been an ambassador before him. His grandmother had been one of the first humans to ever speak to an alien species. This was his family's legacy, and perhaps his greatest test. "Humanity has served the Council well," the Chancellor continued. "Your engineers have repaired systems we thought beyond fixing. Your doctors have cured diseases that plagued us for generations. Your soldiers have fought bravely in conflicts across the galaxy. For this service, we are grateful." There was a pause. Deho felt it coming before the words left the Chancellor's mouth. "However, humanity is too young. You have existed as a spacefaring civilization for merely 3 centuries. Many species in this chamber have civilizations spanning tens of thousands of years. You are emotional, unpredictable, and often violent. While you make excellent workers and service members, you are not ready for the responsibility of true Council membership." The chamber filled with sounds of agreement. Clicks, hums, roars, and whistles from 1,000 different species, all saying the same thing. Humanity was useful, but not equal. "The vote has been taken," the Chancellor announced. 847 species voted against humanity's petition. 0 voted in favor. The matter is settled. Humanity will continue in its current status as a contracted service species. You may continue your work for the Council, and perhaps in another few centuries, we will revisit this discussion. Deho stood there for a long moment. His face showed nothing. No anger, no disappointment, no surprise. Behind him, the other human representatives were equally still. The chamber grew quiet as thousands of alien eyes watched the humans, perhaps expecting an outburst or protest. Instead, Deho simply bowed. It was a formal gesture, respectful and proper. Then he turned and began walking toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. Behind him, one by one, every human representative followed. They walked in a perfect line, their faces calm, their movements dignified. No one spoke. No one argued. No one pleaded or threatened or made any sound at all. The Council members watched them go, confused by this reaction. The Volgrim Chancellor looked at his advisors, uncertain. Other species began talking among themselves, discussing what the human silence might mean. Some thought it was acceptance of their place. Others wondered if it was shame. A few, very few, felt the first whisper of unease as the last human disappeared through the chamber doors. Laughter began to spread through the crowd. The Krillian ambassador made a joke about training pets. Well, the Fandosi representative commented that humans knew their place after all. The tension broke, and the Council moved on to other business. On Earth, the news spread quickly. Humanity had been rejected. After 300 years of service, after countless lives saved and problems solved, the answer was no. People gathered in the streets of every major city. Some cried. Some raged. Some simply stood in stunned silence, but the government had been prepared for this outcome. Deho had sent word the moment the vote concluded. Within hours, messages went out to every human working for the Galactic Council in every corner of known space. The messages were simple and identical. Come home. On Vectorus Prime, engineer Hyojin received the message while calibrating a planetary shield generator. She had spent 15 years maintaining the shields that protected this world from its violent sun. The aliens who lived here had built the shields 1,000 years ago, but had long since forgotten how they actually worked. Hyojin was the only one who truly understood the ancient systems. She read the message 3 times. Then she began packing her tools. On Medical Station Helio 7, Dr. Sangwoo was in the middle of treating a patient suffering from crystalline plague when his tablet chimed. He had dedicated 40 years of his life to understanding this disease, developing treatments that had saved millions of alien lives. He looked at the message, then at his patient, then back at the message. He finished treating the patient. Then he wrote detailed instructions for continuing care and placed them in the station's medical database. He packed his research, said goodbye to no one, and boarded the next transport heading toward human space. Captain Minsu was navigating her ship through the dangerous Korvan shipping lanes when the message arrived. For 20 years, she had kept these trade routes safe, guiding merchants through spatial anomalies that would have destroyed their vessels. The aliens paid well for her services, but they had never once asked how she did what she did. She altered course immediately, setting coordinates for Earth. All across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. Humans read their messages and began the journey home. They did not announce their departures. They did not explain or justify. They simply left quietly and without fanfare, leaving behind the systems and stations and worlds they had maintained for generations. The Galactic Council did not notice at first. Humans had always been reliable, always present, always working. Why would that change? They had accepted their rejection with dignity and silence. Everything would continue as it always had. But in the depths of space, human ships were already moving. Thousands of them, all heading in the same direction. Away from the Council, away from the species who saw them only as useful tools. Toward home, and toward something new. The galaxy would soon learn what silence truly meant. 3 weeks had passed since. The humans walked away from the council chambers. For the first week, everything seemed normal across the galaxy. Ships moved along their routes, stations maintained their operations, and worlds continued their daily functions. The Galactic Council held its regular meetings and made its usual decisions, barely thinking about the humans who had been rejected. On Vectorus Prime, the Vectari people went about their lives as they had for centuries. Their world orbited close to a violent red star, and without the planetary shields, life would be impossible. The shields had protected them for over a millennium. A gift from their ancient ancestors who possessed knowledge, long since lost to time. Engineer Hyojin had arrived at the shield control center. Every morning at exactly 6 o'clock for the past 15 years, she would spend hours calibrating the generators, adjusting power flows, and maintaining the delicate balance that kept the shields operational. The Vectari technicians would watch her work, nodding as if they understood. But they never asked questions and never learned the systems themselves. On the 22nd day after the council vote, Hyojin did not arrive at 6 o'clock. The Vectari technicians waited, assuming she was simply late. By noon, they began to worry. By evening, they checked her quarters and found them empty. All her belongings were gone. She had left Vectorus Prime without telling anyone. The technicians assured themselves that the shields would be fine. After all, the systems had been running for 1,000 years. How hard could it be? They examined the control panels, which displayed information in languages both Vectari and human. They understood their own language, of course, but realized quickly that Hyojin had been reading both sets of readouts, cross-referencing them in ways the technicians had never considered. 3 days later, the shields began to flicker. Warning lights appeared on panels that the Vectari had never seen illuminate before. They pressed buttons randomly, hoping something would work. The shields stabilized briefly, then failed completely. Deadly radiation from the red sun poured down onto Vectorus Prime. Emergency sirens wailed across the planet as millions of people rushed to underground shelters. The Vectori government sent desperate messages to the Galactic Council, begging for help. They needed an engineer who understood ancient shield technology. They needed someone like Hyojin, but Hyojin was gone. And so were all the other human engineers who had maintained similar systems across the galaxy, halfway across known space. On Medical Station Helio 7, Dr. Sangwoo's absence was creating an even deadlier crisis. The Quilver species suffered from crystalline plague, a disease that caused their silicon-based biology to malfunction and crystallize in fatal patterns. The plague appeared in cycles roughly every 5 years and had killed billions throughout Quilver history 40 years ago. Dr. Sangwoo had arrived at Helio 7 as a young researcher. He had spent decades studying the plague, learning its patterns, developing treatments that reduced mortality rates from 90% to less than 5%. The Quilver considered him a miracle worker, though they never truly understood his research. They simply brought him patience, and he saved them. The latest outbreak of crystalline plague began just 4 weeks after Dr. Sangwoo departed. The Quilver doctors at Helio 7 opened his research files, confident they could continue his work. But the files were dense with human medical terminology, cross-references to Earth biology, and treatment protocols that assumed knowledge the Quilver doctors did not possess. They tried their best, using the treatments Dr. Sangwoo had developed for previous outbreaks, but this strain was different, mutated in ways that required adjusted treatments. Dr. Sangwoo would have recognized the changes immediately and modified his approach. The Quilver doctors did not have his intuition or his deep understanding of the disease. Patients began dying at rates it's not seen in 40 years. The outbreak spread from one station to dozens of worlds. Panic swept through Quilver space as people realized that the doctor who had protected them for so long was gone. The Galactic Council received thousands of requests for help, for any medical expert who could replace Dr. Sangwoo, but there was no replacement. His knowledge existed in files that made little sense to non-human doctors. His treatments required an understanding of both human and Quilver medicine that no one else possessed. The Quilver were dying, and there was nothing the Council could do in the Corvin shipping lanes. Chaos of a different kind was unfolding. These routes connected 12 major trade hubs and passed through regions of space where reality itself became unstable. Spatial anomalies appeared without warning, capable of tearing ships apart or throwing them light years off course. The lanes were essential for galactic commerce, but incredibly dangerous. For 20 years, Captain Minsu had navigated these routes with perfect precision. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to predict where anomalies would appear and how to guide ships safely around them. The Corvin Trade Authority paid her well and never questioned her methods. They simply knew that ships guided by Minsu always arrived safely. When Minsu left, the Trade Authority assumed any experienced captain could manage the routes. They hired a Volgrim navigator with 3 centuries of experience. On his first run through the Corvin lanes, his ship encountered an anomaly that Minsu would have detected hours in advance. The ship and its cargo were lost. All crew members died. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 more ships disappeared in the Corvan lanes. Trade through the regions slowed to a trickle as merchants became terrified of the routes. Entire economies that depended on Corvin trade began to suffer. The Trade Authority begged the Galactic Council for help. For any navigator who could replace Minsu, the Council sent experts. All of them failed. None of them possessed Minsu's intuitive understanding of the anomalies. The shipping lanes, once the galaxy's busiest trade routes, became known as death traps. Similar stories emerged from every corner of Council space. On the industrial world of Tannhauser, factories ground to a halt without the human maintenance crews who had kept century-old machinery running. On the research station, Kepler-9, experiments failed catastrophically because the human safety officers who had prevented disasters were no longer present. On the agricultural moon Fandos, crops began to fail without the human farmers who had introduced advanced rotation techniques. The Galactic Assembly Council began receiving emergency requests by the thousands. Every message told the same story. Humans had left, and everything was falling apart. The council members were confused. How could the absence of one species cause such widespread problems? Humans were just workers, just service providers. They were useful, yes, but surely not essential. Supreme Chancellor Thexmore called an emergency session. He stood before the assembled council and made an announcement that he believed would solve everything. "We will contact humanity and order them to return to their posts," he declared. "They are contracted to provide services to the council. They cannot simply abandon their responsibilities. We will demand they honor their agreements." Council voted unanimously in favor. A formal message was composed and sent to Earth's government. The message was not a request. It was an order, delivered with the full authority of the Galactic Council. Humanity would return to work immediately, or face consequences. The message was delivered to Earth. It was received by the human government. It was read by Ambassador Deho himself. And then there was silence. Days passed. The Council waited for a response, for acknowledgement, for anything. But Earth's communication channels remained quiet. No arguments, no negotiations, no compliance. Just absolute, complete silence. For the first time in its 10,000-year history, the Galactic Council had given an order that was simply ignored. And as more systems failed, as more disasters unfolded, as more species sent desperate pleas for help, the Council began to realize something terrifying. Humanity was not coming back. 2 months after humanity walked away, the Galactic Council faced a reality that seemed impossible. The galaxy was collapsing around them, and they could not stop it. Defense Coordinator Gu had designed the Council's entire military communication network 20 years ago. The system connected thousands of warships, defense stations, and planetary militaries across Council space. It was a masterpiece of encryption and adaptive algorithms that could route communications even through the chaos of battle. The network had never failed. Not once in 2 decades, Gu had maintained the system personally, updating it constantly to counter new threats and incorporate new technologies. She had trained others, of course, but her training focused on operation, not on the deep understanding of how the system actually worked. When she received the message to come home, she had backed up her personal files, locked the core systems, and departed within a day. The Council's military commanders had not worried. The network was functioning perfectly when Jiwoo left. They assumed it would continue functioning. What they did not know was that Jiwoo had been fighting off cyberattacks and intrusion attempts every single day, making hundreds of tiny adjustments to keep the system secure. Without her constant vigilance, the network was vulnerable. The Kryn Horde had been a minor threat for decades. They were raiders and pirates, dangerous to individual ships, but never a serious challenge to Council military forces. Humanity's special forces had kept them in check, disrupting their bases and intercepting their communications. But the special forces were gone now. The Kryn were smarter than the Council had ever given them credit for. They had been watching. They had been waiting. And when GOE's network went undefended, they struck. The attack was perfectly coordinated. Kryn hackers, using techniques they had been developing in secret for years, broke through the military network's defenses. They did not destroy it. Instead, they corrupted it, sending false orders and routing communications to wrong destinations. Council warships received commands to move away from threatened areas. Defense stations went on high alert in sectors where no threats existed, leaving actual target zones undefed. The Kryn Horde attacked 3 major worlds simultaneously. By the time the Council realized what was happening, millions were dead, and the Kryn had seized control of strategic facilities. The Council tried to coordinate a counterattack, but their communication network was useless. Ships could not talk to each other reliably. Commanders could not trust the orders they received. The military network that had protected Council space for 20 years had become a weapon used against them. And the one person who could have fixed it was sitting on Earth. Reading reports of the disaster with quiet sadness, on the agricultural moon of Phandos, a different kind of catastrophe was unfolding. Farmer Biora had spent 30 years on this moon, transforming its farming operations from barely sustainable to incredibly productive. She had introduced crop rotation techniques, soil management systems, and irrigation methods that the native Fandosi had never imagined. The moon's farms now fed 12 billion beings across 4 star systems. The Fandos had watched Biora work for 3 decades. They had followed her instructions and planted the crops she told them to plant, but they had never understood why she made the decisions she made. They did not know that certain crops depleted specific nutrients from the soil, or that others restored those nutrients. They did not understand the complex balance Biora had created. When Biora left, the Fandos continued planting crops the same way she had done the previous season. Why would they change what worked? But Biora had been planning 3 seasons ahead, rotating crops in patterns that maintained soil health over years. Without her guidance, the Fandos planted all the wrong crops at all the wrong times. 6 weeks after Biora's departure, the first crops began to fail. The soil had been depleted of nutrients, and the Fandos did not know how to restore it. They tried using fertilizers, but I did not understand which fertilizers to use or in what quantities. They made things worse. Within 2 months, famine was spreading across 4 star systems. Billions of beings who had never worried about food suddenly faced starvation. The Fandosi government begged the council for help. For any agricultural expert who could replace Biora, the council sent specialists. But they specialized in alien farming methods that did not work on Fandos. The soil chemistry was wrong, the climate was wrong, and without Biora's specific knowledge, no one could make the farms productive again. At Nexus Station, the galaxy's largest trading hub, Administrator Taeyang had managed the impossible for 15 years. The station coordinated 17,000 ship arrivals and departures every single day. It was a logistical nightmare that required predicting traffic patterns, managing docking schedules, and preventing the thousands of small disasters that could occur when not many ships occupied the same space. Taeyang had made it look easy. He used algorithms he had written himself, combined with an intuitive understanding of how traders behaved and how traffic flowed. Ships arrived and departed with perfect precision. Collisions were unheard of. The station ran so smoothly that most people did not even realize how complex the operation was. The Volgrim, who replaced Taeyang, had 300 years of experience in commerce and logistics. He was considered one of the finest administrators in the galaxy. He took one look at Taeyang's systems and declared them unnecessarily complicated. He would simplify things, make them more efficient. Within a week, he had created disaster. Ships collided in holding patterns because the simplified schedules did not account for the different speeds at which various species operated. Cargo containers were routed to wrong destinations because the new system did not track the complex web of secondary transfers. Critical supplies were delayed or lost entirely. By the end of the first month, Nexus Station had descended into chaos. Traders began avoiding it, seeking other routes for their goods. The economic impact rippled across the galaxy. Thousands of businesses that depended on Nexus Station started to fail. The employment crisis spread. Entire planetary economies that relied on trade began to collapse. The Volgrim administrator was replaced. His replacement failed even faster. The problem was not competence. The problem was that Taeyang had built a system that required his specific way of thinking to operate. It was not something that could be learned from manuals or explained in simple terms. It required years of experience and a particular kind of mind in the council chambers. The emergency sessions continued day and night. Representatives from hundreds of worlds came begging for solutions. The military was failing. The economy was collapsing. People were starving. Infrastructure was breaking down everywhere. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore finally broke with protocol. He personally led a delegation to Earth, carrying formal apologies and offers of improved terms. They would pay humans more. They would give them better positions. They would show proper respect. Please, just come back. The galaxy needed them. The delegation arrived at Earth to find every human space station powered down and abandoned. The orbital facilities that had bustled with activity for centuries were dark and empty. Earth itself had withdrawn behind a defensive perimeter of warships. Getting permission to even approach the planet took 3 days of negotiation. When they finally landed, Ambassador Deho met them at a small conference room in Geneva. The delegation presented their offers, their apologies, their desperate pleas. They spoke for over an hour, explaining how much the galaxy needed humanity. How many lives would be saved if humans returned? Deho listened to everything in silence. When they finished, he stood and walked to the window. He looked out at the city, at the humans going about their lives, at the world that had decided it no longer needed the approval of alien species. Then he turned back to the delegation and spoke words that made them understand how badly they had failed. "You had 300 years to see us as equals," Deho said quietly. 300 years to recognize that we were not your servants, but your partners. You saw us only when we were useful. You valued our work, but never our voices. And now that your galaxy is burning, you come to us with apologies and better offers. He paused, his expression sad but firm. You will learn what this galaxy looks like without us. And perhaps, when you understand what you have lost, we can discuss what comes next. The delegation was escorted back to their ship. They returned to the council with the news that humanity would not be returning. The silence from Earth continued, absolute and unyielding. And across the galaxy, the collapse accelerated. 6 months after humanity withdrew from council space, civilization itself was fracturing in ways that seemed impossible. The Galactic Council, which had maintained order for 10,000 years, was watching helplessly as everything fell apart. The Kryn Horde had become the dominant military power in the galaxy. What had started as raids on 3 worlds had expanded into a conquest of entire sectors. The Kryn had captured 12 major worlds and dozens of minor colonies. They controlled strategic resources and critical shipping lanes, and the Council could do nothing to stop them. Commander Sung Ho had led the Council's special forces operations for 18 years. He was a tactical genius who understood how to fight asymmetric warfare. Against enemies like the Kryn, he had trained elite units from dozens of species, teaching them human military strategies that had been developed over centuries of Earth's brutal history. Under his leadership, the Kryn had been contained, their bases destroyed before they could coordinate major attacks. But Sung Ho was gone now. Along with every human tactical advisor and special forces operator, the Council's military commanders tried to fight using their own doctrines. Strategies developed for wars between established civilizations, clear territorial boundaries and predictable behaviors. The Kryn did not fight that way. They were raiders who struck from nowhere and vanished before defenders could respond. They adapted constantly, learning from every engagement. The Council kept sending fleets to retake captured worlds. The Kryn kept ambushing those fleets, using the corrupted military network to track Council movements. Thousands of ships were destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died, and the Kryn territory continued to expand. Refugee crises overwhelmed every major hub in Council space. Billions of beings fled from Kryn-occupied territories, seeking safety in regions that could barely support their own populations. The infrastructure to handle such massive displacement simply did not exist. Refugee camps became cities. Cities became disaster zones. Disease spread. Violence erupted. The Council's resources could not cope with the scale of suffering. The medical catastrophes multiplied beyond anyone's ability to track them. The Quilver crystalline plague had killed 30% of their population before the outbreak finally burned itself out. But the plague was just one of hundreds of medical crises. On the water world of Aquaria, bacterial infection was spreading because the human microbiologists who had maintained the sanitation systems were gone. On the desert planet, Xeric 7, a heat-based virus was killing thousands because the human doctors who understood thermal medicine had departed. Dr. Songwoo's research sat in databases across the galaxy, detailed and comprehensive, but it was written in human medical terminology, cross-referenced with human biological knowledge. Based on assumptions about problem-solving that came naturally to human minds, but not two alien ones. Non-human doctors could read the words, but they could not understand the thinking behind them. They could not replicate Sang-woo's intuitive leaps or his ability to see patterns across different medical disciplines. The Council established a medical research team of the galaxy's finest doctors from 20 different species. They were given access to all of Sang-woo's files and unlimited resources. After 3 months of work, they had made almost no progress in understanding his treatment protocols. The knowledge was there, written down in careful detail. But the ability to use that knowledge was locked behind a way of thinking they did not possess. Infrastructure failures became daily occurrences across Council space. Nuclear reactors that humans had maintained for generations were going critical. Engineers from other species tried to stabilize them using the maintenance logs humans had left behind. But the logs assumed baseline knowledge that these engineers did not have. Simple instructions like adjust flow rate to compensate for thermal variance meant nothing to species who had never encountered that particular type of reactor design. Space stations lost life support systems. Entire populations were evacuated to planetary surfaces, creating more refugee crises. Jump gates malfunctioned, trapping ships in dead space where rescue was impossible. Whole crews died slowly as their life support ran out and no one could reach them in time. On Vectorus Prime, the population had been living underground for 5 months. The planetary shields remained offline despite the best efforts of dozens of engineers from across the galaxy. They had Hyogen's maintenance logs. They had her technical specifications. They had every piece of documentation she had created over 15 years, but they could not make the ancient systems work. The radiation levels on the surface were lethal. The Vectari could survive underground indefinitely, but their civilization was dying. No crops could be grown. No construction could happen. They were trapped in their shelters, waiting for a rescue that was not coming. The galactic economy had entered complete collapse. Without Nexus Station functioning properly, trade routes that had existed for thousands of years were breaking down. Traders could not get goods to markets. Manufacturers could not receive raw materials. The complex web of interstellar commerce that connected thousands of worlds was unraveling. Unemployment reached levels not seen since the last Great Galactic War. 5,000 years ago, businesses failed by the millions. Entire industries vanished overnight. Species that had enjoyed prosperity for centuries suddenly found themselves in poverty. Crime rates exploded. Social order began breaking down on dozens of worlds. The Council's own finances were in freefall. Their revenue came from taxes on trade and fees for services. But trade was dying, and no one could afford to pay for services anymore. The Council could not pay its own employees. Government workers began abandoning their posts. The bureaucracy that had run the galaxy for 10 millennia was dissolving in the Council chambers. The atmosphere had changed from panic to despair. The representatives no longer debated solutions. Instead, they argued about who was to blame. The Volgrim blamed the Fandos for not learning basic agriculture. The Fandozi blamed the Krillians for not securing their military networks. The Krillians blamed everyone else for relying too heavily on humans in the first place. Supreme Chancellor Thexmore tried to maintain order, but his authority was crumbling. Species that had respected the Council for thousands of years were openly defying its edicts. Some worlds were withdrawing from the Council entirely, deciding to face the crisis alone rather than contribute resources to a failing government. A faction of military hardliners proposed invading Earth, forcing humanity to return. They argued that Earth's defensive perimeter could be broken, that humans could be compelled to resume their duties. The proposal was debated for 3 full days. Ambassador Deho learned of the proposal through intelligence sources that humanity still maintained in Council space. He sent a single message in response, broadcast on open channels so everyone could hear it. Any attack on Earth or human territory will result in the permanent withdrawal of all human knowledge from galactic databases. Every maintenance log, every research file, every technical specification that humans have created over 3 centuries will be deleted. You will face your crisis without even the hope of eventually understanding what we built. Choose wisely. The message ended the invasion debate immediately. The council realized that they did not even have copies of much of the knowledge humans had created. Humans had maintained the systems directly, often keeping their detailed understanding in personal files rather than central databases. Losing access to that knowledge would make the crisis permanent and unsolvable. A vote was called. It was proposed by a junior representative from a small species that had never held any real power in the council. Her name was Lyra. She was one of the few council members who had actually become friends with human workers over the years. She had listened to them, learned from them, and understood what the council had failed to see. "We need to offer humanity what we should have offered them from the beginning," Lyra said to the assembled council. "Not just membership, not just voting rights. We need to offer them a place as our equals, with real power to shape the galaxy's future. We need to give humanity a permanent seat on the Supreme Council itself, with veto authority over major decisions." The proposal was radical. In 10,000 years, only the oldest and most established species had ever held Supreme Council positions. The idea of giving such power to humanity, a species barely 3 centuries old, was almost unthinkable, but the alternative was the complete collapse of galactic civilization. The vote took place in a chamber that had never been quieter. One by one, species cast their votes. When the count was finished, the result was unanimous. Every species, even those who had laughed at humanity's petition 6 months ago, voted in favor. The offer was transmitted to Earth with every possible diplomatic honor and expression of respect. The council waited for a response. Days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks, then 3. Earth remained silent, and the galaxy continued to burn. 3 weeks after the council made its offer, Ambassador Deho finally responded. His message was brief and simple. He would meet with the Galactic Council one final time. He would come alone, and he would speak to them about the future. The council chamber was more crowded than it had been in centuries. Every species representative was present. Even species who had not attended a council meeting in decades made the journey. Everyone knew this moment would define the galaxy's future. Supreme Chancellor Thexmore personally welcomed Deho when he arrived, offering every gesture of respect and honor that council. Protocol allowed, Deho walked to the center of the chamber just as he had 6 months earlier. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. There was no arrogance in the room, no casual dismissal. There was only desperate hope mixed with fear. The council needed humanity, and everyone knew it. Deho activated a holographic display. The image showed Earth, surrounded by thousands of ships. The council members recognized human vessels, but they also saw ships from species they barely knew existed. Minor races who had never joined the council. Independent colonies from the fringes of civilized space. Forgotten worlds that the council had deemed too primitive or too insignificant to bother with. For 300 years, Deho began, his voice calm and clear, humanity served you. We fixed your machines when your own engineers could not. We healed your sick when your own doctors had given up. We fought your wars when your own soldiers were not enough. We solved problems you thought impossible, and we asked for only one thing in return. He paused, letting the silence stretch. We asked for respect. We asked to be seen as equals, as partners in building this civilization. And you gave us contempt. You gave us praise for our work, but never our voices. You valued what we could do for you, but never who we were. The hologram shifted, showing bustling space stations and thriving colonies. Ships moved along new trade routes. Construction was happening on a massive scale. Everything looked organized, prosperous, and peaceful. These past 6 months, humanity has not been hiding on Earth, waiting for you to realize your mistake, Deho continued. We have been building something new. We reached out to every species you ignored. The miners of Beck 7, who you called too primitive because they preferred simple tools over complex machines. The artists of Lumina, whose culture you dismissed as worthless because it did not fit your aesthetic standards. The warriors of Tanak, who you labeled as savages because they valued honor over efficiency. The hologram showed more worlds, more species, more activity. The scale of what humanity had built in just 6 months was staggering. We offered them what you never offered us, Deho said. True partnership. We did not come to them as superiors offering charity. We came as equals offering cooperation. We shared our knowledge freely, and they shared theirs. We learned from them, and they learned from us. Together, we have built something that does not rely on hierarchy or ancient privilege. We call it the Free Systems Alliance. Supreme Chancellor Thexmore stood, his forearms trembling slightly. Ambassador Deho, we understand our mistake. We have offered you everything you requested and more. We have given you a seat on the Supreme Council with full veto power. Please, the galaxy is dying. We need humanity's help. Deho met the Chancellor's gaze steadily. You are right, Chancellor. The galaxy is dying, but you are wrong about what it needs. The galaxy does not need humanity to come back and fix your broken systems. The galaxy needs what it has always needed, beings working together as equals, valuing each other's contributions regardless of how old their civilization is or how much power they hold. He gestured to the hologram again. You had that opportunity. For 300 years, you had humans working alongside you, showing you a different way of thinking and operating, and you never once asked us why we were so good at solving your problems. You never wondered what made us different. A representative from the Quilver species, her crystalline body still showing signs of plague scarring, spoke up. What made you different, Ambassador? Why could you solve problems we could not? Deho smiled slightly. Because we listened. Because we were willing to learn from anyone, regardless of their status. Because we did not assume we already knew everything. Every human engineer who maintained your ancient systems took time to understand how your ancestors thought. Every human doctor who treated your diseases studied not just your biology, but your culture and history. Every human navigator who guided your ships learned from the species who traveled those routes before. He paused, letting that sink in. We're good at solving your problems because we respected those problems in the peep. La, who faced them. We saw the galaxy not as a hierarchy with ourselves at some particular level, but as a community where everyone had something to offer. And that is what the Free Systems Alliance is built on. The chamber erupted in discussion. Representatives talked urgently among themselves. Some species looked hopeful. Others looked defensive. A few looked angry. Deho waited for the noise to die down, then spoke again. Humanity is not returning to the Galactic Council. That era is over. But the Free Systems Alliance is open to any species willing to join on equal terms. And I mean truly equal terms. Your civilization's age does not matter. Your military power does not matter. Your technological advancement does not matter. What matters is your willingness to work with others as partners, to share knowledge freely, and to value contribution over status. Supreme Chancellor Thexmore took a step forward. You are asking us to dissolve the Galactic Council? To abandon 10,000 years of tradition and join your new alliance as equals with species we have always considered primitive? I am not asking you to do anything, Chancellor, Deho replied. I am offering you a choice. The Council can continue as it is, trying to rebuild with the knowledge and resources it still possesses. Or you can admit that the old way has failed and join us in building something better. The decision is yours to make. The debate that followed lasted for 6 hours. It was chaotic and passionate and often angry. Species accused each other of causing the crisis. Old grudges surfaced. Ancient rivalries flared. But gradually, as the hours passed, a consensus began to emerge. The council members realized they had a choice between pride and survival. They could cling to their traditions and watch their civilization die slowly, or they could let go of their assumptions about superiority and hierarchy and join something new. Representative Lyra, who had proposed giving humanity a Supreme Council seat, was the first to formally advocate for joining the Free Systems Alliance. Her species had never held real power in the Council, so they had less to lose than the dominant civilizations. But her words were passionate and convincing. We have spent 10,000 years believing that age equals wisdom, she said. That power equals right to rule. That traditions must be preserved at all costs. But look at where that belief has brought us. Our galaxy is burning. Our people are dying. Our civilization is collapsing. Maybe it is time to admit that the old ways are not always the best ways. One by one, species began to vote. Not all of them. The old powers, the civilizations that had ruled the council for thousands of years, were reluctant. But enough voted in favor. When the count was finished, 823 species had chosen to dissolve the Galactic Council and petitioned to join the Free Systems Alliance. 24 species, mostly the oldest and most traditional, voted to maintain the council as it was. They would rather face collapse than admit they had been wrong. As the votes were recorded, Deho prepared to leave. Supreme Chancellor Vexmore approached him one final time. The proud Vulgrim leader looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of what had just happened. "We thought you needed us," Vexmore said quietly. His voice meant only for Deho to hear. "We thought you were grateful for the opportunity to serve. We never imagined you would walk away." Deho regarded him with something that might have been sympathy. "We never needed you, Chancellor. We wanted to work with you to be part of something larger than ourselves. But we wanted it as partners, not as servants. The question now is not whether we need you. The question is whether you can learn to see everyone else the way you should have seen us." Dexmore was silent for a moment, processing those words. "What happens to the species who chose not to join your alliance?" "The same thing that would have happened if we had never existed," Deho replied. "They will face their challenges using their own knowledge and resources. If they succeed in rebuilding, we will not interfere. If they fail, they will have made their choice. But the Free Systems Alliance will not support those who refuse to join us. We are not your servants anymore." He turned and began walking toward the exit. But this time, he was not alone. Representatives from 823 species followed him. Leaving behind the council chambers that had been the center of galactic government for 10,000 years, behind them, the Great Hall stood nearly empty. 24 species remained, sitting in a chamber built for thousands. Surrounded by the echoes of a civilization that had just ended, Deho walked through the corridors of the council station toward his ship. Around him, representatives from hundreds of species talked excitedly about the future, about what they would build together, about the possibilities of true cooperation. They were species who had been ignored or dismissed by the old council. They were ready for something new. As his ship prepared for departure, Deho looked back at the station one last time. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction in seeing the mighty brought low. He felt only sadness for the waste of it all. 300 years of human effort spent in service to a civilization that had never truly valued them. And now, the chance to build something better from the ashes of that failure. The ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, carrying Deho and the representatives toward the Free Systems Alliance headquarters. Behind them, the Galactic Council chamber sat in darkness. Ahead of them, a new galaxy was waiting to be built, in humanity, along with 800 species who had chosen partnership over hierarchy. Began the work of proving that there was a better way, a way built not on age or power or tradition, but on mutual respect, shared knowledge, and the simple recognition that every being, regardless of origin, had something valuable to contribute. The old galaxy had ended in silence. The new one would begin with voices raised together, building something that had never existed before. Something equal. Something better. Something worthy of the beings who created it.